Hey, BookTube. Let's do a tag, shall we? The tag is the chess book tag by Aaron Read a Book, who's the creator, and I was tagged by Steve Donoghue probably quite a long time ago, probably like 4 months ago, or give or take. And I thought I would do it now. And the prompts are all based off of the pieces on a chessboard, so we'll go through them. The first prompt is Pawn, a book about a lowly character that rises through the ranks. And the book that immediately came to mind for that was Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. So this is the only Dickens I've read up to this date. But this book is about Pip, who comes from a lowly family, and he is, in a sense, he's poor, I believe, well, he comes from a quite poor family, but there's an event that happens in the very early part of the novel that ends up informing the rest of the novel, though we don't find about it until the twist at the end, because he comes from a poor background, but then he somehow gets a mysterious sum of money given to him, or not really given, but with conditions where he has to become educated. He has to become, the money comes with expectations, really, and he's not really told who's giving him this money. It's all very blurry, and he never meets the person until, of course, the very end. And then the novel is just him struggling not only with his poor upbringing, but with his newfound rise in rank. And the novel it's interesting. It's the book that people recommend when they recommend a Dickens book, because it's not too long, not like some of his bigger chunkers, and it is very much, I've been told, very much a Dickens book, like with all of Dickens' normal use of characters and just his prototypical plot line. And this has been the only Dickens I've read up to date, and I say that kind of guilty because I've got a lot of Dickens on my shelf that I actually have not read, and I haven't really been all that inclined to go back to him, because this book is, I liked it, but it didn't blow me away, and it was interesting enough, but not enough for me to go pick up, say, David Copperfield and read, 800 pages of a story that's similar to this. So I have a lot of Dickens on my shelf, but I feel guilty that I have not gone back to him since I've read this, and it's been quite a bit since I've read this book. So Dickens is definitely an author I should be going back to. I haven't even read his A Christmas Tale, which is scandalous, really. But prompt number 2 is Rook, a book that features a castle, a tower, or a chariot. And that seems like you would go to a fantasy book for that, and that's what Steve did in his book, or his video. But I'm going to go with the chariot prompt in there, and I'm going to say the Iliad. This is this is the epic poem by Homer, and this is the beautiful Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition, translated by Robert Fagles. And, what can I say about this book that hasn't already been said? But connecting it to chariots, this book, there's a lot of battle scenes in here, and what came to mind with the chariot prompt is that there's chariots used in the fight scenes here, and what's so noteworthy about this book when I first read it was those fight scenes where they're so explicit, but not just in gruesome, violent, deliberately like trying to make you disgusted kind of way. It's a very almost like a personalized violence, where Homer likes to discuss characters and their backgrounds and maybe their relationship to the people on the other side that they're fighting, and then right after that, he kills him in some gruesomely described way. And chariots are used in some of those scenes, and in some of those memorable scenes too, because spears are one of the weapons that they have, and a spear is usually something that is usually the best way that you can use to attack someone on a chariot. None of the chariot scenes are coming to mind offhand, just thinking about it, but I've read the Iliad twice. This is the edition that I read first, and I sort of liked it. I don't think I really got it the first time, so then I reread it a couple of years ago in this translation, and this is the W.H.D. Rouse translation. I actually did a review of this book after I read it on this channel, back when my camera quality was a lot worse, but I love this cover, as you can see, and actually the Signet Odyssey actually has a matching cover where if I positioned it right here, it would complete this guy's face, but then have, I think, more of a sea background to fit the Odyssey, but I don't have that volume. I only have this one here. And this is a prose translation from the 50s. This edition is from the 90s, I think. And this one is a prose translation from the... No, this is even earlier. This is from the 30s, I think. Yes. Yeah, 1938. And I actually got along with this translation a lot better. And I think it's partially to do with the verse, because I always find verse... For me in poetry, I get distracted a lot by the lines and the intricacies of rhythm and whatnot, and it takes away from my ability to comprehend the content a lot more clearly. So then this book just strips that all away, and I'm getting the story just in prose. And I found that was quite refreshing, and I also liked the translation. I thought it was a lot clearer in the way that the story was conveyed. So even though he wasn't trying to recreate poetry, and I think that did a lot to benefit me in my reading. So I don't know what translation I'll read next, but that was a really good translation. So we'll move on to prompt number 3. This is Night, a book about an animal or animals. Bonus, if a horse. I didn't read any books about a horse, or nothing that comes to mind. But the book I have in mind here is the Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. I don't have a physical copy of it because I have it on my e-reader, and it's the first book in his Dark Materials trilogy, and I think it's stretching the prompt a bit, because the prompt is asking for a book about an animal or animals. But what I have in mind with the Golden Compass is every character in the Golden Compass has, because it's a fantasy book, so in this fantasy world, which takes place at about the 1920s, as if it were a fantasy land, everyone has this animal with them called a demon, which is basically a reflection of their personality in animal form. So the main character, she's a 11-year-old girl, and she has a demon, and when you're a kid, your demon can shift form into basically any animal that it wants. But once you get older and you mature, your demon matures and fixates into one form, and they don't get to choose that form. The form that it fixates into determines your social position, basically. For example, the servants in the Golden Compass, their demon is in the form of dogs, because they're more docile and subject to enthusiastic command. But then the more gritty characters, more commanding characters, have much more commanding and more aggressive demon characters. And there's a whole social convention about these demon characters, because they cannot move too far beyond your body, and they don't talk to anyone else, even though they can all speak. they speak the language same as the humans do. They can't they don't usually talk to any other people, and and no one ever touches them. Like touching someone else's demon is like basically the greatest taboo. And it's a very interesting concept because these animals play a big role inside the formation of the series. So I thought I would bring that one up because basically the main character has an animal, and the animal is always with her, and you're always talking, and you can confide with your demon. The demon seems like a separate character, even though they're just another aspect of you. So it's very interesting how Pullman plays with that concept in that series. Prompt number 4 is Bishop, a book that features religious characters. Bonus points for Bishop. Well, I'm going to get my bonus points because my answer to the prompt here is Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. And the whole premise of the story is based off of the Bishop of Barchester dying and being replaced by a bishop that the whole community struggles to get along with. So I read The Warden before this, and The Warden is about Mr. Harding and his hardships, or his conflict with some kind of charity house that he was the director of, and he got quite a good sum of money doing that based off of the will of some rich person many centuries previously that was connected to land that has only increased in wealth. And there was a whole conflict around that, and he ended up stepping down. But he was friends with the bishop, which was an older man, and the older man has a son who is deacon in the parish, and those characters all come back in this book in a much longer one than The Warden. The Warden is around 200 pages, and this one is over double that, I think. Yeah, it's over 400 pages. And this is about how the replacement for the bishop is he's more of a liberal man of the world type bishop who is virtually a pawn, no pun intended actually, a pawn of all the political and religious figures around him. So he's got, and also his family, so he's got a wife who's very commanding. And sorry for that light. Let's see if I can do something about that. That did not help at all. I don't know what I can do to... That's the best I can do. Sorry about that. So he's a pawn to his wife, who's a very commanding personality, and who butts her head in religious matters way more than a wife usually would. And then he's also got his own personal right-hand man. There's a term for him. Obadiah Slope. And he's basically this greasy pastor type who tries to latch on to anyone he can in order to increase his rank in the religious orders of his day. And he also likes to control the new bishop as basically a puppet, and him and the wife clash as well as with the conservative leaning parish in which this bishop has taken over. And I quite enjoyed this book, but I can see how people would not, because it is basically a book about religious squabbles in Victorian England. And the only reason why this book actually succeeds as a book is because Trollope is actually a great writer, and he's a great storyteller. And this book is actually quite entertaining, even though the premise is rather boring and very different from, say, Dickens. And I think I've talked about the difference between Trollope and Dickens from my understanding, but I have not read enough of either of them to really be conclusive on that front. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next prompt. Next prompt is Queen, a book with a strong female character. And Philip Pullman's series could count as that because the main character there, she is a strong female character. But I'm going to go with another stretching of the prompt. I'm going to go with the Fairy Queen, book 3. Book 3 of the Fairy Queen. And that follows the knight that represents chastity, Britomart. And yes, he writes about a woman knight. And I find that chapter quite interesting, too, because, well, for one, I haven't read enough of, well, it went against my expectations of what traditional chivalric legends or stories or tales, how they run. And, because he chooses a woman to be the strong and confident and very able knight, though he doesn't have any pretensions, as we would nowadays, about her being stronger than men. And one thing that he doesn't bring up often, but the reader has to keep in mind, is that when she fights other knights and she defeats them, she's not doing this through brute strength. He mentions early on that she has a spear that she just took with her, and it happens to be this magical spear, or not really a spear, but I forget what they call them, a lance or something, that has this ability to knock off anyone off their horse in a battle of two knights, and that's how she manages to defeat a lot of really able knights in the story, though she's not bad in a sword fight herself, which she ends up proving quite often. But yeah, the story of Britomart is basically, she was a girl in a castle, coming from royalty, until she found this mirror in her father's in some closet or something, and the mirror ended up telling her, or showing her, a face of a very handsome man that she immediately fell in love with. And now she ended up dressing up in arms in order to go on a quest to find this man, the face of this man, which is supposed to be the fates bringing her to her husband. And so along the way, like all chivalric tales, she ends up having a whole bunch of different adventures along the way. And one of the things that's funny about her as a character, not only is she an able knight, but when she saves a lot of damsels from like evil monsters or wizards or something, the men usually get quite jealous of her, because not only is she quite able and capable, because they don't know that she's a woman, she hides her identity, and usually, even when she enters a castle for hospitality, she usually refuses to take off her armor and her helmet, because everyone would know she's a woman then, and sometimes having people not know that is very advantageous to her, so she can be a little bit deceptive that way. But then men get jealous too, and sometimes there's rumors that go around about how this knight has been sleeping around with a damsel that she saved, but once the men find out that it's a woman, they feel very foolish. And usually the women feel very comfortable around her once they find out she's a woman as well, because they can never trust another man except for their lover, apparently. So, but anyways, I thought that was Britomart. She deserved a good shout out here as a strong female character, and she ends up in a later book in the Fairy Queen, she ends up having to save her lover too, which I thought was a great part of the story. I won't give any more away in case you worry about spoilers, but anyways, now we're up to the last prompt, King, a book about a monarch or ruler, which actually the Fairy Queen would fit quite well, considering that the whole book, the premise of the epic poem, is Edmund Spenser trying to kiss up to the Queen Elizabeth of his time. But I'm going to go a different route, and I'm going to stretch the prompt again, and we're going to go with Plato's Republic. And I read this just this year, and I don't think I understood a whole lot of it, other than I know that Socrates would not be a person I would like to get along with or speak with a lot, because he seems quite full of himself. But anyways, the reason why I talk about this one as a book about a monarch or ruler is because famously, Plato, through the voice of Socrates, or through through the voice of Socrates, he discusses the perfect or the ideal state, and that includes this core group of training of an elite class, not just of warriors, but of statesmen and women. And the whole point of this training is to separate them from the rest of the common people, and determine which of these people are good enough to be rulers. And the training is mental and physical. So there's a lot of, not only is there physical training, because these people are also going to be warriors and they're going to fight, but they're also going to be trained in a whole bunch in different ways in order to determine who are the wisest and most adept at leading the society. And Plato is okay with it being one person, but he's also okay with it being a couple of people. But the one major qualification that he has is that they must hate their job. They must not want to be in power at all. And so the whole point of putting them in power is that if they hate their job, or hate being in power, it is because they are virtuous enough to deny the natural temptations that come with power. So they won't exploit their position, because Plato gives them basically free rein. But they have the ability to basically do anything, but what keeps them in check is their own training into strong moral principles. And if these people are thrust into power reluctantly, they will do the right thing out of duty towards the people and towards the position that they're in, so that these people will be the ones that will not make rulings out of self-interest, but rulings based off of the interests of everyone else. And I found that, and I think I butchered that, but anyways, I find that idea very interesting from Plato, because you get the sense that, it is an ideal society, but what it struck me as like you're putting a medieval monk, basically, one who's quite well trained, into the position as a king. And I don't know what Plato would think on the idea of power corrupting those men, but I do think he does address that a little bit, but not enough to really satisfy me, because this book just seemed like a lot of not only unrealistic thought experiments, but it didn't strike me as a viable way in order to structure a society at all. It seemed a lot of just Socrates almost putting himself forward as what would be an ideal ruler, because if you know anything about Athens at this time, Athens was a democracy, and democracy was not very popular in Athens in the 5th and 4th centuries outside of Athens. So Athens was very much into democracy, and there were democratic states outside of Athens, and usually they were in league with Athens, but in Greece in general, it was usually not seen as a very positive thing, because normally because of the distrust of the people, because that's what democracy was back in the day. It was a direct democracy system where the people had influence in who led them, or who led their city. And Plato is very much against democracy in this book, but and that's why he puts forward his own system, which was actually quite, or at least more aligned with the Spartan system, like Sparta, the ancient Greece city, which is basically the Athenian rivals at the time, and they had a separate warrior class that was similar to this, though this Plato goes a lot further. He's a lot more strict with his pronouncements and with his ideas than what Sparta did, because Sparta mostly trained physically, while Plato was very much into the mental and the moral aspect of their rulers as well, because those, if you begin super young and you train these people in these principles, it'll become like second nature to them, and to go against that once they become rulers would be to go against everything they've been taught and everything that they know and they cherish. So it's not a very convincing portrait, but it's interesting nonetheless, fascinating to think about and to contemplate, at least a little bit. But yeah, so that's why I fit this book into the prompt about a monarch and a ruler. So that's the chess book tag. I'm not going to tag anyone because not only is this an old tag and I'm coming at it very late, but I don't really know who else I could tag because I'm sure everyone has done this tag already. So anyways, that'll be it for this tag. Thanks, BookTube.